just had a question about the nursing that you talked about earlier. We just hired an administrative director that's a nurse, and my understanding in CLIA 88 that the director of laboratories had to be a laboratorian, and I was wondering how this could occur with a nurse now heading up a laboratory, a very large laboratory. And has the CLIA 88 regs changed that are allowing nurses to do this?
I would say the answer is no. I don't have the CLIA regs in front of me. I can talk to you about that afterwards, but
because we're already seeing it. We're a large laboratory.
So is this person serving as a director or as a supervisor of some sort?
She's serving as the associate director of laboratories. The pathologists are the directors of the laboratory, and she is serving as the associate director of laboratories for a large medical institution in Chicago.
That doesn't sound right to me.
All
I
right,
have to look at the regs.
Actually, it's interesting that you brought that up, because when we were analyzing our burnout data, we found a lot of our respondents say that many of their administrators are not lab professionals, which causes conflict between the lab professionals and the C-suite, because they don't understand the needs of the lab. So it causes a lot of job satisfaction in the workforce. So it's interesting that you brought up, because it was common in our data. So I don't know if there's a rule that allows them to do that.
Is the person
the CLIA only recognizes the laboratory director. There is nothing in CLIA called associate laboratory director.
Right.
So this person is in an administrative role within the laboratory, not in a legal role in all likelihood. Matt's point was really about
technical?
Really because of right now how nursing is treated versus how we hope nursing will be treated in the future by CLIA. It's unclear on some of these things. The fact that this person's really not in a CLIA recognized role within the laboratory is probably the most important thing. Second piece is, we don't know the components of that BSN degree or the MBA degree or some other training.
Right.
All of those things need to be interpreted in order to understand what's appropriate, what's not appropriate under the current regulations. Moving forward, I think we are, I can speak on behalf of ASCLS, we're in support of the recommendations that CLIAC made to the Secretary of Health and Human Services around changes to looking at educational background, not degrees.
Right, I agree. I think one of the things in terms of the person's background is, if you look at what CLIA did what CMS did with the April 1st memo, the degree that this person has may work for certain categories within CLIA, like technical director or something like that, or technical supervisor. So it might qualify that person into that slot. But there's usually an experience requirement, and that they would have experience doing testing. Now, if this person's not doing anything that's technical in nature, isn't overseeing techs, then you probably could put anyone in that position.
So I just put up a slide that talks a little bit about some of the staffing and certification. And I found this very interesting, that at least to kind of preface this, and correct me if I'm wrong here, so there are two different kind of divisions here in the way the ASCP survey was done. There's a histology, which is just histo technicians and histo technologists, and then there's anatomic pathology, which encompasses everyone under that umbrella. So cytologists, pathology assistants. Does this include lab aides as well? Those kinds of, no. So it's only certified people who would be qualifying for this. So interestingly enough, most people ask to have their staff to be certified. At least one HT is certified. The numbers of supervisors and staff that are certified is relatively high, about 50% for most cases. And most people will say that they want to have a certified person as a requirement for them being employed. However, in anatomic pathology and histology, we see this tremendous drop, and I'm just going to put up the next slide. We see this big drop in the number of individuals who indicated that certification is a requisite for them to come into the laboratory. What's driving this? Can you see that? I pointed out that the numbers of both histology and anatomic pathology, and anatomic pathology is on the bottom of the list.
Yes. I think this is because we have this shortage that is happening across the board. And so from what I read in our qualitative analyses, some supervisors hire, even though you're not certified, but you can do it, you can perform the test, they let you do the testing. So that's why the numbers there went down. I think that was the reason. Because there's an extreme shortage that they take what they can get staff-wise.
The other thing I remember too from the survey when I was reading, maybe it was the survey before, which I thought was really interesting, is that there is a priority placed on hiring credentialed techs, which I understand what we're talking about because Jim said this earlier about, you know, lowering the standards. But what I find really interesting is that the priority is there, but there is no reimbursement for obtaining the credential or maintaining the credential.
What's interesting in these numbers is the relative numbers between the different departments. Where you see it on the high end, you've got blood bank. And I wonder to what degree this has to do with recognition within CLIA and the strength of the organizations that are pushing these kinds of things. Much less the difference between 16 and 18, the difference within each department I think is more telling.
Yeah, it's actually one of the reasons why Dr. Chiriboga and I are going to be sitting in the CLIA meetings until this gets taken care of. I mean, Dr. Hilborn, as we, you know, and also I want to give, even though she's not here, we need to acknowledge Claire Thornton. So Claire Thornton is from Region 1. She's the former Region 1 director, and we worked to get her appointed to that personnel work group. And here's what's really cool. We've put this out in writing, but I'm sure many of you haven't seen it, is CMS posed very specific questions to this work group that they wanted answered. Dr. Hilborn and his team came back to CLIA, the Clinical Laboratory Improvement Advisory Council, and said, we know you didn't ask for this, but we believe that Histo Technology should be recognized under CLIA similarly as Histo Technology. So that's a huge win. However, as we sat in that room, we were getting all excited taking our notes. By the end of the day, all these multiple recommendations were condensed into 3 or 4 sentences, and it's buried. So when I saw Dr. Hilborn at the Board of Certification meeting last week, he came up to me and said, you're going to be there, right? You're going to ask them how they're doing on these recommendations, right? And I said, you betcha, we'll be there. So we'll continue. This is a marathon. It is not a sprint. But I think a lot of the things that we're talking about and listening to my colleagues and talking to you on a daily basis on the phone and at our meetings, we are in this for the long haul, and we're talking maybe 5 to 10 years. So we have got to stay the course, and I'm going to go back to my previous comment that we must, I repeat, we must speak with one voice.